Your Excellencies, esteemed panelists, dear ladies and gentlemen, my name is Tomasz Grysa. In the absence of the Archbishop Auza, I am chargé d'affaires ad interim of the Permanent Observer Mission of the Holy See to the United Nations. And I am very happy to welcome you to this morning's event on a new era for advocacy for international religious freedom in response to a new age of challenges and threats which the Holy See is honored to be sponsoring together with the NGO Committee on Freedom of Religion and Belief. So, as I said, I am representing Archbishop Bernardito Auza, Permanent Observer of the Holy See, who is with his parents in the Philippines as they celebrate their 74th wedding anniversary, a rare occasion indeed. He has asked me to deliver the following remarks in his name and to moderate this morning's event. At the end of last year, the international community celebrated the 70th anniversary of the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 18 of the UDHR affirmed that everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, and specified that this right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom, either alone or in community with others and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. Later, this right became part of international law in Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which further specified that no one shall be subject to coercion that would impair his freedom to have or to adopt a religion or belief of his choice, emphasized that the freedom to manifest one's religion or beliefs may be subject only to such limitations as are prescribed by law and are necessary to protect public safety, order, health, or morals, or the fundamental rights and freedoms of others, and prescribed that parents have the freedom to ensure that religious and moral education of their children in conformity with their own convictions. Despite this robust understanding and protection of the right to religious freedom in international law, however, we have been witnessing across the globe various severe, routine acts of intolerance, discrimination, persecution, and even genocide against religious believers on account of the beliefs they hold. There has been a steady rise in acts of violent anti-Semitism, like the people gunned down in a kosher supermarket in Paris or in a synagogue in Pittsburgh. Muslims have had to endure growing intolerance, discrimination, and even persecution by some states out of Islamophobia, as well as attacks from fellow Muslims who do not believe they adhere to the correct form of Islam. Christians, according to a heralded 2017 study released by Notre Dame's Center for Ethics and Culture, Georgetown University's Religious Freedom Research Project, and the Religious Freedom Institute, led by Dr. Thomas Farr, one of our panelists, are the world's most widely targeted religious community, suffering terrible persecution globally, even though in many quarters this persecution is ignored. Each year, there are likewise many documented cases of targeted discrimination and persecution against Hindus, Buddhists, Samaritans, Sikhs, Falun Gong, Jehovah's Witnesses, Ahmadis, Scientologists, and others. The Yazidis, as no one needs to be reminded, suffered a genocidal attack. And in various places, atheists too have endured systematic discrimination and persecution in violation of their right freely to believe that there is no God and to order their life according to that conviction. The 2018 report of the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion and Belief noted that 24 states with an official state religion impose very high or high levels of restrictions on religious practices, while another 18 with favored religions likewise had similar very high or high restrictions. The 2018 annual report of the US Commission on International Religious Freedom, led by Ambassador Sam Brownback, documented 28 nations wherein governments and non-state actors targeted dissenting members of majority communities and non-religious persons with severe abuses, including, it stated, genocide and other mass atrocities, killings, enslavement, rape, imprisonment, forced displacement, forced conversions, intimidation, harassment, property destruction, the marginalization of women, and bans on children participating in religious activities or education. Moreover, the 2018 report on religious freedom in the world by Aid to the Church in Need, who have leading representatives present with us today, detailed how from June 2016 to June 2018, the situation of minority faith groups deteriorated in 18 of the 38 countries found to have significant violations of religious freedom. There was an increase in religious freedom violations from state actors. There was also increasingly aggressive forms of nationalism hostile to religious minorities that have led to increased systematic intimidation of religious minority groups as disloyal aliens dangerous to the state. There has also been, it noted, an upsurge in what the report terms neighborhood terrorism throughout the world, attacks in which non-state actors target those of particular religious beliefs. It is clear that violations of the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion go far beyond the methodical and appalling acts of terrorism, vigilantism, killings, deportations, the rape, kidnapping, and enslavement of women and children, the confiscation and destruction of property, attacks against converts and those who are alleged to have induced them, and encouraged or condoned violence. They also include anti-apostasy and anti-blasphemy legislation, bureaucratic harassment and administrative burdens with regard to building houses of worship and schools, discriminatory structures in family law and education, and stigmatization of people as unbelievers or heretics. It must also be noted that violations against religious freedom are taking place not just in states with official or favored religions, but also in countries where an aggressively secular mindset treats religious belief as unworthy of public dialogue and the public square, seeking to reduce freedom of religion to merely freedom of worship, what is done, in other words, in private homes or houses of worship, in clear violation of the right to manifest one's religion and to mandate that children be indoctrinated in principles that effectively constitute a secularist religion, contrary to their religious beliefs. Today, you will hear much more about these and other attacks on freedom of thought, conscience, and religion across the globe from our panelists. In response to these growing challenges, there is need for a new era for advocacy and protection for religious freedom. Various governments, like Hungary and the United States, both represented on our panel, as well as civil society organizations like the Religious Freedom Institute and the various member organizations of our co-sponsor, the NGO Committee on Freedom of Religion and Belief, are helping to lead that effort. Indeed, because of the attacks the world has witnessed in recent years against various groups of religious believers, the protection of the right to religious freedom must be one of the most urgent responsibilities of the international community. The protection given must extend beyond merely preventing the intended or actual annihilation of religious minorities. It must include examining and addressing the root causes of discrimination and persecution against them, and spur the vigorous defense and protection of the rights enshrined in the UDHR and the ICCPR. On February 4th in Abu Dhabi, Pope Francis and the Grand Imam Ahmad al-Tayyib of Al-Azhar University, one of the leading figures in Sunni Islam, signed a landmark joint declaration on human fraternity for world peace and living together that addresses many aspects of our theme today. They attempt to address the topic of where attacks on religious freedom originate and what must be done to defend against those attacks. It gives light, I think, not only for religious believers of their two traditions, but for believers in general and for the international community. They forcefully addressed, first, the attacks on religious freedom that come from the hateful attitudes, hostility, and extremism that originate in a deviation from religious teachings and lead to political manipulation of religions and interpretations made by religious groups who, in the course of history, have taken advantage of the power of religious sentiment in the hearts of men and women in order to make them act in a way that has nothing to do with the truth of religion. This is done, they said, for the purpose of achieving objectives that are political, economic, worldly, and short-sighted. They therefore made a passionate appeal to all concerned to stop using religions to incite hatred, violence, extremism, and blind fanaticism, and to refrain from using the name of God to justify acts of murder, exile, terrorism, and oppression. God did not, they affirmed, create men and women to be killed or to fight one another, nor to be tortured or humiliated in their lives and circumstances, and underlined that God does not want his name to be used to terrorize people. They also addressed the dangers that come to religious freedom in secular societies. These derive from a desensitized human conscience, a distancing from religious values, and a prevailing individualism accompanied by materialistic philosophies that deify the human person and introduce worldly and material values in place of supreme and transcendental principles. This anthropological materialism, they imply, undermines human dignity by ignoring the human person's spiritual nature and eventually leads to a practical atheism that fails to acknowledge, value, advocate, and defend for the person's spiritual rights, including the right to conscience and to order one's life to what one believes God has revealed. Pope Francis and Grand Imam Al-Tayyib then explicitly addressed the right to religious freedom and what must be done to defend and advance it. Freedom, they wrote, is a right of every person. Each individual enjoys the freedom of belief, thought, expression, and action. And therefore, the fact that people are forced to adhere to a certain religion or culture must be rejected, as to the imposition of a cultural way of life that others do not accept. There is, they affirmed, a freedom to be different that comes ultimately from God and undergirds the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and belief. They spoke about the protection of places of worship as a direct consequence of the defense of freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Addressing both governments as well as believers, they underlined the protection of places of worship, synagogues, churches, and mosques is a duty guaranteed by religions, human values, laws, and international agreements. Every attempt to attack places of worship or threaten them by violent assaults, bombings, or destruction is a deviation from the teachings of religions as well as a clear violation of international law. And very importantly, they mutually affirmed that in order to protect freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, there is a need to bolster the concept of the rule of law and equality before the law based on the principle of citizenship, regardless of one's religion, race, or ethnicity. The concept of citizenship, they wrote, is based on the equality of rights and duties under which all enjoy justice. It is therefore crucial to establish in our societies, they continued, the concept of full citizenship and reject the discriminatory use of the term minorities that engenders feelings of isolation and inferiority. Its misuse paves the way for hostility and discord. It undoes any success and takes away the religious and civil rights of some citizens who are thus discriminated against. The law, they stressed, must equally and unequivocally guarantee every citizen's human rights, among which is the right to freedom of religion, even in places where one religion is accorded special constitutional status, the right of all citizens and religious communities to freedom of religion, equality before the law, and appropriate means for recourse when their rights are violated must be recognized and defended in order to establish and maintain harmonious and fruitful coexistence among individuals, communities, and nations. I would urge everyone present to read the document. To make it easier to do so, I have brought copies of the Pope's and Grand Imam's declaration for everyone here, available on the Secretariat table before me. because it is a substantial contribution to the overall advocacy that must be done in promotion and defense of international religious freedom today in response to a new age of challenges and threats. Let's turn now to our superb panel. Our first speaker is His Excellency Ambassador Sam Brownback, United States Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. He served for 2 years as a congressman in the U.S. House of Representatives, 16 years as a U.S. Senator, and 8 years as governor of Kansas. While in the U.S. Senate, he worked actively on the issue of religious freedom in multiple countries and was a key sponsor of the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998. The Office of International Religious Freedom he now leads has the mission of promoting religious freedom as a core objective of U.S. foreign policy, monitoring religious persecution and discrimination worldwide, developing programs to promote religious freedom and conscience as a fundamental human right and source of stability for all countries, assisting emerging democracies in implementing freedom of religion and conscience, assisting religious and human rights NGOs in promoting religious freedom, and identifying and denouncing regimes that persecute on the basis of religious belief. Its annual report on international religious freedom, focusing on the status of religious freedom in each of 195 countries throughout the world, is one of the most important evaluations of the state of religious freedom available. Ambassador Brownback, thank you for accepting the invitation to come today to the United Nations. It is an honor to give you the floor.
Thank you very much, and it's certainly my pleasure to join you today. And I want to thank the sponsors of this event, Holy See, ADF, others, for putting this together. So thank you very much. I think it's a very needed event. I associate myself with your opening statement. I think you really covered the waterfront in an amazing and thorough way. I do want to recognize my predecessor in this job, Ambassador Rabbi David Saperstein is here, and who did a fabulous job in the prior administration in this position. I want to be brief and succinct and to the point. One, a global movement to push religious freedom is desperately needed. A global movement of nations all over the world to embrace the fundamental UN Charter of Human Rights that declare, as was just previously stated, an individual's right to religious freedom. This is something virtually every nation in the world has agreed to, and it's a situation where nearly 80% of the world's population is persecuted in. 80% of the world's population lives in a religiously restricted atmosphere. Another 80% of the world is religious. How can we tolerate this continuing situation? And you just heard a series of countries and places and faith communities that are in some sort of difficulty or persecuted when, in fact, they are guaranteed this right in most constitutions and by the UN Charter. Why do we tolerate this situation? We need a global movement of religious freedom. The good news, one is started, and it's starting here today. This is something that needs to take place out of this body and out of people that are here to push for religious freedom. We need a global organization, maybe not out of the UN, but out of some other place that has advantages, that if people join it, there are advantages. You have a basic standard of religious freedom that you must comply with. There are advantages of joining the organization, and if you don't comply while you're in it, there are teeth to it that if you don't comply, these minimum standards, the teeth can be used to remove the benefits that you have. We have to act, and we need to do it now, and this will help a huge portion of the world's populations. And you only have to look pretty briefly to see some dire situations for people of faith around the world. Look at the Uyghurs in Western China, where you've got over 1 million people in detention camps, primarily because they're Muslims. Primarily. They can't name people certain names in that situation. You're seeing churches being destroyed in China. You're seeing Tibetan Buddhists, the Chinese government trying to pick the successor to the Dalai Lama. when the organization, the faith itself, has that right, and only they have that right. You can go nearby to Burma and the Rohingya being kicked out of their country. Again, nearly 1 million people in refugee camps, primarily because of their faith. You can look in Iran, and where if you aren't in the majority faith situation, you're likely being persecuted. Baha'is and Christians and Jews and Zoroastrians, a number of different faiths persecuted because you don't agree with the majority faith. In Iraq, we've seen a genocide of Yazidis and Christians. And I've met myself with Yazidi women who have been sold up to 10 times by ISIS fighters claiming a religious mandate to be able to do this. And people killed and kidnapped. And I've talked to a woman who had a 15-year-old mentally handicapped child beat out of her arms that they said that they could take him from her. Why? And they said they could do it because of her faith and their disagreement with it. And we see that of other faith communities, whether they're Hindus or Buddhists and many, many others around the world. We need your advocacy. The situation is dire, and we can't just keep talking about it. We got to do something, and it needs to have carrots and teeth associated with it. The United States again this year will host a ministerial, like we did last year, foreign ministers from around the world in Washington. This one this year is July 16th to 18th, where we will be putting forward a number of different presentations, but also suggestions for action. July 16th to 18th. You're all welcome to come and to attend, and if you're interested in an invitation, talk with Riley Barnes over here. Riley, if you want to hold your hand up so people can see, because we want to invite a lot of civil society and countries to be at it. Last year we had 84 countries represented. We hope to have more this year. We started just this week a series of regional religious freedom summits. I just flew in from Abu Dhabi Tuesday. We had the first one was there. The topic was textbook materials, because unfortunately in a number of countries the textbooks will put in material that are derogatory, even hateful towards religious minorities, and this has to stop. Where governments are actually funding textbooks to persecute religious minorities or to put in the minds of young people that the persecution is fine. This is completely wrong. And I applaud the UAE for stepping up and hosting this first regional summit. The next one I'll be flying to next week will be in 2 weeks, not in 2 weeks, 10 days in Taiwan, March 11th to 12th. Where we'll bring together civil society groups to talk about what they can do to advocate for religious freedom in their countries. We've started and are working with 6 different nations now that are starting religious freedom roundtables in their nations, in their countries, in Iraq, South Korea, Nigeria, Taiwan, Hungary, Kazakhstan, and others, getting advocacy groups in country to advocate for religious freedom in that nation. We have one in the United States, Washington, D.C. Every Tuesday I'm in town. We meet on Capitol Hill, 11 to noon, to talk about current situations around the world on religious freedom. Again, you're welcome to come to that one. We look for future regional summits in Morocco on religious heritage sites that are being destroyed because of their being faith-oriented. Mongolia is going to host one primarily of Buddhist majority countries about religious freedom in those areas. Europe, one is planned there, and others are being planned as well. I appreciate and support strongly the efforts of countries here at the UN to start a Friends of Freedom of Religion or Belief group here at the United Nations. I understand Poland is leading that effort and that Hungary is going to be a part of it. Hopefully others will join that effort to push for freedom of religion here at the United Nations. There's an international contact group of governments headed by the Canadians and us that people can join, and I hope do join. And these are groups that jump together to push religious freedom issues around the world. There's an international parliamentarian group that exists that I would urge, if you're associated with parliamentarians, to be a part of that. I understand as well that when the Poles have the presidency of the Security Council, they're going to push for a meeting on freedom of religion or belief. And I applaud that effort, and it needs to take place. And hopefully there will be more ambassadors of religious freedom appointed as that number is growing around the world of people in my type of position that can advocate for this. But we've just got to do that. The situation is deadly in many places around the world. There are people in prison for their faith that should not be there. There is deadly violence that happens on the street and in social settings towards minority religions in way too many countries. We need your help. We need your action. We need you to lean in. We need your prayers to ratify or to correct this situation. And now's the time. And it's my belief that we really have got some momentum moving, but you got to capture the momentum to make something happen out of it. We want something new to happen to where freedom of religion can be a reality and will be a reality. And I predict that it will happen in the world, that we'll have freedom of religion for everybody. But we've got to make it happen to bring this iron curtain of religious persecution down globally. Thank you very much. God bless you all.
Thank you, Ambassador Brownback, for helping us see the big picture of the situation of religious freedom internationally, describing what is happening and what must happen in response. I think our community has already some baby teeth, but now we must grow crocodile teeth to tackle it properly. I would now like to turn to Archbishop Ignatius Kaigama, Archbishop of Jos in Nigeria and former president of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Nigeria. In 1995, Pope John Paul II named him one of the youngest bishops in the world, making him at age 36, how lucky you were, the bishop of the new diocese of Jalingo. 5 years later, he was named Archbishop of Jos, where the problems with Boko Haram and the Fulani herdsmen are acute. Together with the late Emir of Ways, he has been heavily involved in promoting mutual understanding between Christians and Muslims. He will speak to us this afternoon on the attacks against religious freedom in Nigeria and lessons that the international community can draw from it. Your Grace, it's my honor to give you the floor.
Thank you, moderator and co-panelists and dear ladies and gentlemen. I thank the Permanent Observer Mission of the Holy See to the United Nations, together with the NGO Committee on Freedom of Religion and Belief, for hosting this forum here. I arrived from Nigeria yesterday here, and during my flight from Abuja to Paris, hoping to connect to New York, I briefly met a priest of Maiduguri diocese. We didn't get to chat a lot, but he told me very quickly that he was returning from the funeral of his father. He lives here in the U.S., and his father had been killed by Boko Haram, and he had gone to do the funeral. And I really felt for him. This incident and 1,000 other such cases are an indication of how the practice of religion for some people can become exaggerated and really become wild. And they do a lot of harm. Yet, if religion is well practiced, it builds, it binds, and transforms persons and peoples for good. We must note that all people are capable of extreme religious views and practices. We must likewise avoid hasty generalization that, for instance, because Boko Haram soldiers are Muslim, therefore all Muslims are guilty of Boko Haram's crimes. In Nigeria, in particular, there is such a hypersensitivity about religion that a little argument can cause or result in a spark that could lead to a great conflagration. Thousands of people in Nigeria have been maimed, displaced, dehumanized, and killed. Religious adherents have been pitched against one another and plunged sometimes into bitter rivalry, hostility, and violence in the name of religion. This contradicts what true religion stands for and gives the wrong impression that religion is a force for evil. Let me talk about the familiar Boko Haram. Boko Haram is a popular name now everywhere, and this is not because of any good thing they are doing, but because of the atrocities that they continue to commit against humanity. It started as a very lovely movement to promote Islam and purify Islam and follow very correctly the teachings of Prophet Muhammad. But after the extrajudicial killing of their leader, Yusuf Muhammad, in 2009, they became very militant. And now they attack. And the attack have been very devastating. They attack, in the beginning, exclusively Christians. But now it is also aimed at Muslims who do not share the Boko Haram's ideology. Boko Haram has committed unprecedented crimes. They have killed more than 28,000 people and have caused more than 3.8 million people to be internally displaced, and they have dehumanized many. They become notorious for kidnapping people. People disappear because they are kidnapped. 2,076 secondary school girls in the village of Chibok were kidnapped, and some are still not found. And recently, over 100 girls, school girls, were also kidnapped. Luckily, 100 of them have been released. But one is being detained. Her name is Leah Sharibu. And why is she being detained? It's because she refused to denounce Christianity to convert to Islam. Bombings of places of worship with people at prayer are a characteristic of Boko Haram. Like the attack on St. Finbar's Catholic Church in my own Archdiocese of Jos. I am a living witness of Boko Haram's atrocities. People were at Mass on a Sunday morning, and this man came in his jeep, well loaded with explosives. A little scout boy stopped him to ask questions. In the process, the car exploded, and he killed himself, killed a little scout boy, 14-year-old, and 14 other people just standing by. If he had succeeded in getting into the church, hundreds of people would have died. Boko Haram has territorial ambitions and is evolving into the Islamic State of West Africa and manifesting the desire to have their own expanded Islamic country. The escalation of religious bigotry and hatred in Nigeria are the consequences of Boko Haram's activities. But Boko Haram is not the only group. We now have the group of herdsmen. They look after cattle and other animals. Because of the climate change, there isn't enough food for their animals, so they are always on the move. And this movement brings them into conflict with farmers, and this results in killings. Not long ago, in Benue State, 2 priests and 17 members of their parish were killed while they were at Mass, celebrating Mass. And in my archdiocese in Plateau State, I can count 300 people killed in just 2-3 months because of the attacks by the herdsmen. And simply because the herdsmen are mostly Muslims and the farmers are Christians, when these happen, people don't talk about the underlying economic issues. They always conclude it's about religion. Yes, there is something about religion. There is a desire to acquire numerical strength and territorial expansion. Both Muslims and Christians do that. But these ones have economic underlying factors. I want to talk about the complaints of Christians in northern Nigeria. Relations between Muslims and Christians in southern Nigeria is very good. We have many Muslims and Christians who live together, they celebrate feasts together, they intermarry. A Muslim can marry a Christian with no problems, no consequences. Somebody can convert from Islam to Christianity or vice versa. His or her life is not threatened. But in northern Nigeria, the story is not the same. You can't do all that very easily. And we need to talk about this, we religious leaders, to talk objectively and dispassionately on how we can really live together and avoid these extreme views and activities. In the core northern part of Nigeria, we have the Muslim majority. And the Christian minority, they are very, very careful, very conscious. They can be attacked anytime. And when I say this about Christians, I want to also remind us that even the Muslims, if they were here talking and having this opportunity, they would say the same thing, that they get discriminated against in the southern part of Nigeria with the Christian majority. In a place like Gombe, Gombe is a state, one of the 36 states. You know, the Muslims are in the majority. The Christians have a minority, but they are not comfortable. And the minority Christians are growing. And this is also making the Muslims jittery. We must talk about these things realistically and openly. You know, we used to refrain from referring to these, and that is why the problems never end. We must call a spade a spade. If the Christians are wrong, they are wrong. If the Muslims are wrong, they are wrong. And we have these issues around us and among us. And in Gombe, for instance, you have the minority. I give you the example of one teacher who was teaching the Muslim children and Christians all together, I think. And it was exam time, and it is said during exams you don't bring in your bags. Now, these Muslim children brought their bags, and I think as exams were beginning, she packed the bags and kept them somewhere. Suddenly one shouted and said, "I have the Quran in my bag." And this woman is a Christian, an infidel, has touched the Quran. And before you know it, the whole class was up in arms, and they caught this lady, their teacher, clubbed her, killed her, and that was not enough. They brought her outside the building and then burned her completely to ashes. So these are the kind of things that are happening. We must talk about them. Sometimes we say to be diplomatic and nice, we should just let them remain like that. So there are many reasons why Christians are uncomfortable. And I am sure Muslims will say the same thing. And if we talk about this, then we will find solutions. But the moment we remain silent, things will continue to degenerate and create more problems. The Christians believe that there are certain measures in Nigeria that are not in their favor, especially Christians in the north. The Muslim majority states in northern Nigeria have provision for Islamic instruction in schools. The Christians don't have, especially in the core north. And then Christians are denied permission to build churches, while Muslims can build mosques anywhere, including in their homes. It can take you 20 years, 30 years to look for a certificate to build a church. This is not always very possible. And then in the civil service, there is discrimination too in the far north. I told you in the southern part, things are okay. But in the north, there are problems. It's so difficult to get into government and into any strategic position. Then also in the north, you find some minority groups are imposed with emirates and Muslim chiefs and so on. That is what triggers the conflict and crisis that you hear us always have in Nigeria, because there is a chief or emir that is imposed against the will of the people. Yes, and marriage is an example. You cannot dare, as a Christian, to take a Muslim girl to marry, but a Muslim man can marry a Christian girl. And this is always creating problems, because girls are girls, boys are boys, they want to befriend themselves. And when it happens that a Christian boy marries or befriends a Muslim girl, there is problem. Their life can be in danger. A recruitment into sensitive government positions are done on a discriminatory basis. In the North, you get a lot of reactions sometimes that are meaningless because something happens in Denmark about the cartoon of Prophet Muhammad, and we have no idea yet. Christians are attacked, churches are burned because of that. So it is going on, and it is no surprise that the northern region, more than any other region in Nigeria, has become the hotbed of religious extremism and fundamentalism. I am finishing. I have small time. In Nigeria, and as a pastor, I talk a lot. But here, I was asked to talk for 12, 15 minutes. That is grossly inadequate for me. If I am to talk about what has happened to me as a victim, as a reconciler, and as a promoter of peace and justice in Nigeria, I need, I think, more than 4 hours. But anyway, I'm rounding off. Attention of the international community is needed. You have said so, Ambassador at large, that so much has to be done. Advocacy is needed. We need more ambassadors of religious freedom. I share the same opinion. We just have to express the fact that human beings are being killed and in the name of religion. This is wrong. This is bad, no matter what the motivation behind this could be. And there is need for assistance from the international community to fight crime. There is kidnapping, and these extremists are on the prowl. We need assistance with modern equipment. The UN should continue to insist and demand of her member states to respect the fact that no one religion should believe it can be a single dominant world religion. Some people have the feeling that they have to be a dominant world religion. We must see in the beauty of others in other religions. Through education, we can step up the capacity of citizens to transcend narrow religious prejudice and indoctrination, to shape a better future through understanding, dialogue, reconciliation, and peace building. We must invest in interreligious dialogue. This is missing. You talked about the Hindus, the Buddhists, the Sikhs, the Christians, the Muslims. There is greater need for more interreligious dialogue. I founded a center in Jos called Dialogue, Reconciliation, and Peace Center. We are doing fantastic job there. We are bringing people together across different religions and tribes, political parties, and ethnic groups, and a lot is being done. We need more of that in many countries and many places. The international community must see to it that states with a religious majority should adopt transparent measures that guarantee freedom of religion so that the majority does not cripple the growth of the minority by stopping them from occupying key positions in government or business. The UN could suggest to all these members to have ministers of religious freedom. What you were saying. The mass media, social media must avoid sensationalism, pitching one religious group against another. Often, what is purely a social, political, or economic confrontation is reported as religious, simply because those involved are Christians and Muslims. Sanity, not sentiments, must prevail in matters of religion. Competition in matters of religion should be only about doing good. It's only about doing good and being holy and being loving towards brothers and sisters. The newly declared re-elected president of Nigeria must do more to help detoxify the minds of youth poisoned by religious prejudices and indoctrination so that they can engage others as fellow human beings with dignity, with respect. Religious extremism, more than any other factor, can cause the polarization and even the disintegration of Nigeria, and that will be catastrophic for the entire Africa. More concrete help is therefore needed to curb the excesses of extremists, criminals, and corrupt leaders. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Archbishop, for describing for us the situation on the ground in the Archdiocese of Jos and throughout Nigeria, as well as indicating for us what is being done and what must be done in response. And the next time you come, we will book this room from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. The third member of our panel is Dr. Hajnalka Juhas, member of the National Assembly of Hungary, Ministerial Commissioner for International Relations regarding humanitarian aid provided by Hungary, and Vice Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Hungarian Parliamentary Assembly. She holds advanced degrees in law and international law and was elected to the Hungarian Parliament in 2018. She will speak to us on the efforts of Hungary in defense of religious freedom worldwide and especially in the Middle East. Dr. Juhas, thank you for your presence today. The floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, the greatest achievement for Western civilization, democracy, is founded on our shared values of tolerance and individual freedom. These values originate in the Middle East, the cradle of Judaism and Christianity. Aggressive attacks and acts of terrorism perpetrated on religious grounds in recent years endanger the historical and religious heritage of the world. Here we can quote the Grand Mufti of the Lebanese Republic, who recently said, "There is no Middle East without Christians." It is therefore a tragedy that the events of the last decade also have forced around 40% of Christians to leave their homelands. Actual harm and destruction faced by Christians living in the Middle East have shown an unprecedented increase in the past 7 years and endangers the very extensive and survival of these communities. Since the war in Syria broke out, we can only guess at the number of Christians living in the country. Some estimates say number is no more than the 400,000, down from 1.2 million prior to 2010. The decrease is even more outstanding in Iraq, where 6% of the population, 1.5 million Christians, used to live in 2003. Today, their number is down to 200, about 50,000. In August of 2013, ISIS occupied the Christian villages left unprotected on the Nineveh plains. The houses were ransacked and burned, and most became uninhabitable. Upon their recapture, the buildings suffered further serious damage, and some settlements were leveled to the ground. This is not only an irreplaceable loss to local Christian communities, but will also result in the dissolution of an intellectual and spiritual treasure shared by all mankind. Recognizing the threat to Christian culture as the foundation of Western civilization, the government of Hungary deems it vital to protect Christian communities around the world and support the families living in those communities. The following two objectives are stipulated in the Hungarian government decision on the establishment of the State Secretary for the Hungary Helps Program and for aid of persecuted Christians, which is the first state secretary among all EU member states, especially dealing with this issue. Firstly, direct support to the Christian communities suffering from persecution and discrimination in the Middle East and in Africa in order to allow them to stay in what was being their homeland for centuries or millennia. Secondly, raising political and public awareness of the existence and spread of persecution Christians in the 21st century. As part of the Hungary Health Program, we created an agency responsible for humanitarian aid coordination, so it will be the engine of our secretary. As laid down in the Hungary Helps initiative, establishing contacts with the leaders of the church communities suffering from persecution is of primary importance for the identification of the most critical humanitarian support needs. The churches and religious leaders are the last stable point for persecuted Christian communities living in insecurity, as they have often lost contact with their central governments. The roots and causes of persecution of religious minorities are diverse. So each case and each region needs to be studied properly, providing efficient help to the victims of persecution and to endangered communities necessitates close cooperation and consultation with those affected. The aid provided must be in turn addressed the local social reality in the widest possible sense. Our first principle is therefore to engage in consultation with the aim of finding feasible and effective solutions. So the Hungary Health Programme support projects recommended to us directly by representatives and leaders of the church communities in need or subject to persecution. In practice, it means that we are working in close cooperation in the Middle East and North Africa region with the Syrian Orthodox Patriarchate of Antioch and all the East, the Greek Catholic Melkite Church, the Syriac Catholic Patriarchate of Antioch, the Chaldean Catholic Church, and the Assyrian Church of the East, among other local organizations. Together we are implementing projects to build and rebuild schools and orphanages and provide support for resettlement programs. Hungary has a humanitarian project for the partial reconstruction of homes in Tel Askov in Iraq, a town on the Nineveh Plains that was occupied by the Islamic State in 2013 and damaged by fighting. The houses of 999 Iraqi Christian families who had left the town were rebuilt by the Hungarian government. Thanks to the program, 1,000 of the 1,300 families driven aflame from Tel Askov have returned to their homes. Community facilities such as the local kindergarten and church we also reopened with the support from Hungary. It might be of particular interest that Alkos in Iraq is in a region where the population of Yazidis is very high. The government of Hungary has provided a project aimed at building a school in there. The training center is open to all religions and communities, including the Yazidi minority, who have also suffered gravely. We see that once the damaged building is repaired and the school is completed and equipped, the facility will be served as a hub for the local community. The government of Hungary is estimated to have helped 200 local families as a result of this project. The government of Hungary is supporting the so-called Open Hospital Syrian humanitarian initiative established by the Holy See, because it agrees that the communities and families in need should be assisted in their homeland, and with enabling these communities to remain in place and assisting those who have fled to return home. As the name suggests, the hospitals are open for those in need regardless of religious background, expressing a dialogue between religious communities. The goal of the Open Hospital project is to provide medical care to victims of war and people who have found themselves with no assistance as a result of destruction. The aid covers the operational cost for an entire year for 3 hospitals, one in Aleppo and 2 others in Damascus. The reconstruction of the Nineveh Plains, a central region of the Christian population in Iraq, remains a focus point of our attention and support. Hungary wishes to join the international initiatives that set out to rebuild the economy of the northern Nineveh region following the war. Hungary is on the way creating an organizational form of international development and humanitarian aid that can effectively address the needs of suffering communities. We have set an objective of expanding the Hungary Helps program to the Visegrad 4 Helps contains Poland, Czech Republic, and Slovakia. As an example, we have a common project with Poland to support an orphanage in Homs, Syria. We are also proposing an implementation of project following this Polish-Hungarian model in other countries. Further planned projects based on cooperation would provide housing and infrastructure reconstruction aid to the Christians of the Nineveh Plains in northern Iraq. In 2017, the government of Hungary announced a scholarship program for persecuted and discriminated Christian young people to pursue higher education studies in Hungary. The goal is to provide an opportunity to Christian youth, many of whom are denied access to higher education in their home countries, to continue their university studies in Hungary. The program aims to help students strengthen their communities at home with the knowledge acquired in Hungary. 18 higher education institutions participate in the scholarship program in Hungary, and we have students from Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Israel, Palestine, Nigeria, Kenya, and Pakistan. During their stay in Hungary, the students receive pastoral care, which aims to help them in preservation of their religious identities. Sadly and truly exemplify that the persecution of religious minorities in many cases coincides with the necessity to protect women and children, in most vulnerable of the vulnerable. As my position as a ministerial commissioner and also a member of the National Assembly of Hungary and a member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, I presented a motion with the name of the continuing violence against Christians in the Middle East, because the Council of Europe itself, with 47 member states, has not addressed this issue since the last 8 years. In the motion, I highlighted that the number of attacks on Christian communities rose worldwide, as well as the number of trial and death sentences for blasphemy, which often affects women and children, such as attacks against Coptic Christian pilgrims in the vicinity of St. Samuel Monastery in Egypt in 2018. For this reason, I called for a new follow-up report on the current situation of persecuted Christians in the Middle East. The Bureau of the Council of Europe will make a decision in April. The motion presented is also an integral part of these efforts to raise awareness. In the light of the situation, I cannot overstate the importance of the widest possible international support for this initiative, and also stressing the need for international cooperation in the form of coordinated and joint action. Raising awareness of the dangers of uprooting religious communities and defining this in irreparable damage to the entire human civilization requires well-orchestrated efforts both at the governmental and non-governmental levels. We believe that the Hungarian approach and our efforts are capable to provide support not only to Christian minorities, but also to strengthen ties with all local communities. We wish to work with other organizations and faith to achieve our goals. We should lend a voice to Christian communities suffering from persecution. Their fear is well-grounded, considering that being a Christian in the Middle East is a way of life and the continuous enactment of 2,000 years tradition that puts great emphasis on religious practice. We believe that Christian communities can play a key role in restoring peace and harmony to these regions. It is vital to consolidate the confidence of the local people and provide them with a vision for a new future. I wish to close with the words of His Holiness Pope John Paul II. Another principle of development is the need to promote values that truly benefit individuals and society. It is not enough to reach out and help those in need. We must help them discover the values which enable them to build a new life and to take their rightful place in society with dignity and justice. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Juhas, for highlighting for us Hungary's work in protecting religious freedom and helping those who have suffered as a result of attacks against their human dignity and rights to have a new start. And many thanks to the government of Hungary for so many good deeds accomplished in the Middle East especially. The final speaker on our panel is Dr. Thomas Farr, President of the Religious Freedom Institute and Director of its International Religious Freedom Policy Action Team. The Religious Freedom Institute works to advance religious freedom for everyone, both as a source of individual human dignity and flourishing, and as a source of political stability, economic development, and international security. Dr. Farr served for 28 years in the U.S. Foreign Service and U.S. Army. In 1999, he became the first director of the U.S. State Department's Office of International Religious Freedom. Subsequently, he directed the Witherspoon Institute's International Religious Freedom Task Force, served on the Secretary of State's International Religious Freedom Working Group, and was a professor of the practice of religion and world affairs at the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University, where he directed the Religious Freedom Project at Georgetown's Berkeley Center. He is the author of an acclaimed 2008 book, World of Faith and Freedom: Why International Religious Freedom is Vital to American National Security. He will speak to us today about new civil society initiatives for protecting religious freedom and belief. Dr. Farr, welcome back to the United Nations. I am delighted to give you the floor.
Thank you so much. Thanks to the mission of the Holy See and the NGO committee for holding this important event and for inviting me to speak at it. I have a joke about speaking last, but I won't tell you the joke. It'll take too much time. I have 12 to 15 minutes as well. 2 decades ago, when I began working in what was at the time the new Office of International Religious Freedom at the State Department, there were very few civil society organizations fighting for international religious freedom, and in fact, there were even fewer governments engaged in that fight. But today, happily, that situation is changing. In 2019, there are literally scores of civil society organizations working in the field, many of them represented here today, and more governments are incorporating religious freedom into their foreign policies as well. The reasons for this increased attention are clear, and we've been hearing it today. For some years, we've been witnessing a global crisis of religious freedom. All the signs are there, and the data confirm them. The scourge of religious persecution is spreading around the world. In virtually every region, religious minorities are facing violent persecution. In many societies, disfavored members of the religious majority are also under persecution. In some countries, non-religious people are persecuted for religious reasons, a less remarked but nonetheless toxic form of religious persecution. And the rise of religion-related terrorism has made the crisis all the more deadly and all the more urgent. Most of the violent persecution occurs outside the West, but the data show that religious freedom, which first emerged in the West, is increasingly at risk in Western democracies as well. This phenomenon does not get as much attention as it should, both for its own sake and because the health of religious freedom in Western democracies has an impact on the effectiveness of religious freedom advocacy by Western foreign policies and civil society organizations in the West. Now, I was asked to speak about dynamic and new approaches by civil society organizations, so I thought I'd tell you about my own. The Religious Freedom Institute is just over 3 years old, but it's the product of decades of work by our leadership team, which is composed of 4 scholars with significant civil society experience. 2 of us also served as U.S. foreign policy officials. Let's begin with how we at the Religious Freedom Institute define religion and religious freedom. We see religion as the search for religious truth natural to every human being. Religious freedom, then, means the right possessed by every person and every religious community to believe and live in accord with religious truth while recognizing and protecting that right for all others. Because it's indispensable to human flourishing, the right of religious freedom must be protected in law and valued in culture. We believe the terrible consequences of denying this right fall into 2 general categories. The first, the most obvious, is vast human suffering, both physical and mental. Violent religious persecution is arguably the most destructive of assaults on human dignity. For one thing, it regularly manifests itself in acts of torture, rape, disappearance, forced flight, unjust imprisonment, and murder. But even nonviolent denial of the right of religious freedom constitutes a profound harm to the human person. In a very real sense, the denial of religious liberty is to deny a person the right to live a fully human life. As a new member of our team put it to me earlier this week, it's like requiring a person be half human. Precisely so. The second consequence of religious persecution is the shattering of justice and peace inside families and communities, within entire societies or parts of society, such as northern Nigeria, as we've just heard, as well as internationally. Religious persecution causes conflict and war, stimulates violent extremism and terrorism, destabilizes political systems, and stymies economic development. Now, at RFI, we support other efforts to reducing persecution. For example, the public naming of persecutors through reports and speeches, conferences, and other vehicles. We engage in these efforts ourselves. Many of you have attended our events, and if you haven't, come to Washington in July, and we will be putting on several events on the margins of Ambassador Brownback's ministerial to advance religious freedom. We also enthusiastically support the heroic efforts of those groups who advocate for the persecuted and for the release of prisoners. We endorse the actions of governments who carefully consider the use of sanctions. When these approaches work, we support them. But our years of working in this field has convinced us that while these and other methods are necessary and important, by their nature, they cannot have a lasting impact because they do not address the underlying causes of persecution. At RFI, we've concluded that the only long-term sustainable solution to this international crisis is to do the hard work of convincing the stakeholders in persecuting societies of the value of religious freedom to them, taking fully into account the historical, structural, religious, and other obstacles to their acceptance of religious freedom. This is not an easy path. We are convinced it is a necessary path. Over the past decade, our leadership, working at Georgetown and Baylor universities, has led research by teams of scholars around the world on the meaning and value of religious freedom to all societies. We've built a substantial body of empirical and theoretical evidence and have helped generate a new cohort of young scholars working in the field. For example, our work in the field of violent extremism provided evidence that religious freedom can undermine religion-related terrorism. That work inspired a young scholar named Nilay Saya, who is a senior fellow for RFI and a professor, has just published an outstanding book entitled Weapon of Peace: How Religious Liberty Combats Terrorism. We're hoping Professor Saya and his work will be featured this July at the second annual Ministerial to Advance Religious Freedom. Our work produced and confirmed other evidence of the social goods that religious freedom fosters. For example, religious freedom is good for economic growth. Over time, it enhances social harmony and political stability. The evidence shows that permitting people to convert from one religion to another is good for societies. It's even good for religions themselves. It turns out that permitting your religion to be criticized and debated, so long as you respond with debate and not with violence, makes your religion more vibrant and dynamic. In 2016, we decided to take this mounting body of evidence out of the universities and into the world. The Religious Freedom Institute, or RFI, was the result. We haven't abandoned the research. We're increasing it. For example, we've just won a 3-year grant from the Templeton Foundation to conduct a 3-year study of the effects of religious freedom for institutions and not just for individuals. But now we are employing this research on the ground, as it were, to make fact-based, empirically defensible arguments in target regions around the world, including the Middle East, South and Southeast Asia, and North America. We have action teams dedicated to each of these geographic areas, as well as functional action teams focused on Islam and religious freedom and international religious freedom policy. RFI is also standing up this year a new Center for Religious Freedom Education in the United States. In each of these areas, we begin our work with a careful study of the landscape. What are the obstacles? And they're often prodigious to a full embrace of religious freedom. Who are the stakeholders and opinion shapers inside government and in civil society? Who are the skeptics and who are the natural allies? After assessing the landscape, we develop action plans across key sectors, including government, civil society, schools, business, and religion. We develop coalitions of stakeholders who see the advantages, or can see the advantages, of religious freedom to themselves, their own religions, their own societies. So let me end by giving you 4 brief examples of our work. First, our Middle East Action Team is active in Iraq, where we're working to convince Iraqis that religious freedom for all their citizens is necessary for their own future peace and stability. This means, among other things, achieving equality between Shia and Sunni, but of profound importance to the future of Iraq. It also means the return of non-Muslim Iraqi minorities who were put to flight by ISIS, including Christians and Yazidis. These groups have suffered terribly and are much diminished. But if they are not induced to return to Iraq in greater numbers and integrated into Iraqi society as equal citizens, the possibility of stabilizing pluralism in Iraq will disappear. That outcome would be catastrophic for Iraq, for the Middle East, and for international peace and stability. RFI's role is to urge governments, especially the United States, to channel more of its assistance directly to those minority communities. Kent Hill, who heads our Middle East Action Team and was a senior official in the U.S. Agency for International Development, is heavily engaged in this effort. Within a year, we hope to open an office of the Religious Freedom Institute in northern Iraq, and we're working to help establish the first Iraqi Center for Religious Freedom in Erbil. The Middle East Action Team is also working with our Islam and Religious Freedom team to conduct a series of consultations with stakeholders from Muslim-majority countries, primarily in the Middle East, to explore the Islamic case for religious freedom for all people, for all citizens of these societies. Next week, we will hold the second in an ongoing series of discussions designed to define and disseminate, and then disseminate the Islamic case. Among other things, we'll present there the findings of a book by one of our affiliated scholars, Dan Philpott of Notre Dame, entitled Religious Freedom in Islam. Second example, our South and Southeast Asia Action Team, which established its offices in Bangalore, India this past summer, has already convened 3 major regional conferences of stakeholders to consider the advantages of religious freedom for their respective societies and to work for its adoption. These conferences included representatives from governments and civil society and drew upon the rich spectrum of religions in the region, including and especially Hindus and Buddhists, Muslims, and the Christian minorities as well. This team is led by Timothy and Rebecca Shaw, who many of you know. Rebecca's research on the value of religious freedom for Dalit women, for the untouchables, and the positive impact on India of their empowerment has had a dramatic and salutary effect already. Again, note the model here. Study the subject, develop the evidence, find stakeholders who see they have a problem and are looking for solutions, provide the evidence of religious freedom's value to them in ways that can be heard and ultimately might be accepted. Third example, our Religious Freedom Action Team is Religious Freedom Policy Action Team, International Religious Freedom Policy, is producing a religious freedom training program for diplomats. I don't know if Ambassador Brownback agrees that diplomats need religious freedom training. I suspect he agrees. For parliamentarians and for civil society groups. That effort is being led by the head of our Canadian affiliate, the Religious Freedom Institute of Cardis, former Canadian Ambassador for International Religious Freedom, Andrew Bennett. Finally, I mentioned that the data show that religious freedom is in decline in the West. That includes my own country, the United States, where the problems include growing anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and anti-Christian bias. We're confronting at the Religious Freedom Institute this problem in several ways. You may have read of the Supreme Court case heard earlier this week about whether a Christian memorial built to honor America's dead in World War I should remain under the Constitution on public land in the United States. Here's how we approach this. The head of our Islam and Religious Freedom Action Team, Ismail Royer, provided the court an Islamic argument for why that cross should be permitted to remain on public land. More broadly, our Center for Religious Freedom Education is developing curricula and other programs for high schools and universities across the United States. Our goal here is to educate the next generation of American leaders concerning their nation's historic commitment to religious freedom for everyone, the first freedom it was once styled. We aim to remind them why it's necessary, not only for individual citizens and groups, religious or not, but for the health of American society. The Center's programs include a 4-year project called the American Charter of Freedom of Religion and Conscience. That charter restates the principles of religious freedom as understood at America's founding and has been endorsed by a wide variety of Americans across the political and religious spectrum. We're adapting it into curricula for schools in the U.S., and we hope to induce other nations outside the United States to develop their own charters, including drawing upon their own respective histories and cultures and understandings of this universal right. So truly, in conclusion, let me repeat the premise on which this particular civil society institution, the Religious Freedom Institute, bases its work. Religious freedom for everyone is not a boutique issue. It's not a nice-to-have, optional human right. It's necessary for each of us and for each of our societies if we are to flourish. Without religious freedom for all of us, none of us can be truly free. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Farr, for describing us about what is happening at the grassroots across the globe to defend and promote freedom of religion and belief, to complement and buttress what is occurring at the level of national governments and the international community. And many thanks for what your institute is doing in this regard. We are running almost out of time, but I think we still may have time for 3 brief questions. So if you would like to make a comment or ask a question to one of our panelists, I would ask you to press the call button at your place and wait until I call on you. Please present yourself and keep your questions and comments brief so that we may take 3 of them just now. And I am opening the floor. Please.
Thank you. George Anthony from Pathways to Peace at the Modern Day Prep Global Institute. And my question has to do with, the topic of today is religious freedom, but it's also about conflict transformation. And I thank you, Senator Brownback, Governor Brownback, and Thomas Farr, and Archbishop. You all hit on key points, and the key points specifically have to be, especially with civil society and interreligious groups, such as some of the people that are sitting with me that are here today, that we as parents, we as part of the community, truly believe in peace. I truly believe, I've worked with Palestinians and Israelis in Jerusalem, I've worked with all over the world, and 85% of the people of this world literally are like parents, like myself, people who believe in peace and people who believe in hope. The question is, how do we get the tools to the hands of the parents, into the schools, into the children? Before me, I have the Global Institute, the students who spent 3 years training to be peace builders. That training are the tools that can create and build a sustainable, peaceful society. But one of the things they learn is how to neutralize conflicts and at the same time engage in others of different religions, how we can all be a community of peace. So, and Senator Brownback, you spoke powerfully about your organization. Thomas Farr, same thing. The question is, how do we get these groups like myself, high schools, parents, communities, interreligious leaders, connected to you so we're all on the same page, creating the dynamics of peace within our own families and our own communities and our own countries. Thank you.
I give the floor to Her Excellency, Ambassador of Kosovo.
Thanks a lot. I'm very happy to be together here with you and to listen to really very strong efforts to create the religious harmony all over the world. I want to stress that in Kosovo, where majority are Albanians, there is a religious harmony, and although our state is secular state and by the laws, everything, the religion is up to individual, and the legislation secures everybody to have the freedom of religion. What I would like to stress also is that what is important, I heard a lot of efforts and a lot of work that you are doing to create the religious harmony. And I wanted also to tell that religious leaders of different religions are very important. I was very happy to hear that Muslim leaders were those who asked that in public soil to continue to stay the memorial, and that's very important, and I think that gives a message. Religious leaders in Kosovo are always together when there is an issue, and they deliver the joint. Regarding to this, I want to say also that they were together to pass the message against stigma for women sexually abused during the war in Kosovo. And they requested the respect and acceptance for those women from their families and from all society. That was not easy task. We were working together with institutions, with parliament, but the religious leader message was crucial, was very important to accept and to diminish the stigma for sexually abused during the war women. Also, I want to remind that in Kosovo and in Albania, the Jews were saved during the Second World War. Although majority are Muslim in Kosovo, and there are also Christians, Catholic and Orthodox and Jewish community, but the Jews were saved from the camps due result of the BESA and duty to help others in need. So in Kosovo, the marriages between religions are very common, and living and working and going to each other's celebration, whether it's Christmas or Easter or Ramadan or Eid, is very common to our place. So I would like also you to have in mind that among many bad things that are happening using the religion against each other, there are also some good places that should be reminding that there is a possibility to do that. So thank you one more time for this great conference.
And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
Oh, okay, sure. Thanks, many thanks. I think that several issues have been mentioned during the speakers' presentations or speeches. I just want to share some of the information because we have. Well, the first is about the vocational training in Xinjiang region. I think that vocational training is a preventive measure of counterterrorism. It has nothing to do religion with ethnicity. Since the 1990s, ethnic separatism, religious extremism, and violent terrorism has committed several thousand terrorist attacks in the Xinjiang region, and actually 1.5 terrorist attacks every day on average. I can give some examples, but it will take so much time, so I just say that one example is 2009, July 5th, a terrorist attack in Urumqi, the regional capital, killed almost 200 people, injured more than 1,700, smashed and burned 300 shops, and more than 1,300 cars, damages numerous municipal public facilities. So the cruelty of the multitude of terrorist attacks can only be rivaled, I think, by Boko Haram, just mentioned by the respectable Archbishop from Nigeria. So to get rid of this extreme ideology, so for those who committed minor offenses, we put them in the boarding schools, and mainly for them to realize that extreme ideology and terrorist attacks incited by this ideology are illegal and wrong, instead of putting prison. All these have been done in accordance with law, because we cannot just sit there and we cannot just let the situation continue deteriorating and letting something similar to Boko Haram and ISIS to taking form in the Xinjiang region in our own country. So I hope that all the international community could have an objective view of what is really going on in Xinjiang. We have further information on this issue. Anyone who wants this information can contact us. Thank you.
I want to thank the people for the comments here. I appreciate the comment about the Vocational Training Center. I've got lists of names of people that have been given to me from people in Xinjiang or have relatives in Xinjiang that don't know where their relatives are. They've been held in detention camps. They can't contact them. They believe a number of them may be missing or dead. I hope I can get those names to you so that you can tell us where the people are that are contacting us on a regular basis. I was with a young man from George Washington University just 2 nights ago. He's had 4 relatives disappear that he doesn't know where they are. And the people would desperately like to know where those individuals are. So I hope we can get this information to you and you can let us know where these individuals are, where they're being held, and so we can tell people what's happening to the people in Xinjiang.
If I might, speaking as a civil society representative, say that it is an outrage to suggest that what is going on in Xinjiang province is vocational training, and that whatever it is intended to stop terrorism. This is what causes terrorism. It is a cause, not a preventive. So I simply want to say publicly what I have said in 3 testimonies before the United States Congress. This is tantamount to a new cultural revolution in China. The entire world condemns what is happening there, and I certainly associate myself with that condemnation. Secondly, responding to the other, if I might, briefly, there are many reasons for the absence of peace, sir, and I applaud what you are doing with your students and your organization. Religious persecution is certainly one, not the only, but it's certainly a major contribution, and religion-related violence and terrorism. The antidote to that is religious freedom, defined as the right of people to exercise their religious beliefs and practices, but to protect them for all others. That's the key. And I think to the extent that you get into this area with your students, if you can emphasize that aspect of it, it would be good. And to our Kosovo colleague, thank you for your comments.
Okay. Yes, thank you. I'm so happy with the different views and opinions, strategies expressed here. I don't know who mentioned it, that it will be nice to be able to help those persecuted and deprived of their rights back at home. I want to subscribe to that, because the home is home. If the international community can help to ensure that they are safe at home and they can live freely, do their work freely, and practice their faith freely, it's certainly going to help, rather than taking them away. So a lot needs to be invested in how to resettle them and integrate them properly at home. And somebody talked about vocational training. We also have a training center that I established. When I saw there were constantly crises erupting, Christian youth and Muslim youth fighting, and some people behind were teleguiding them, either political or ethnic bigots or whoever they were using them to fight. And I said, what do? We started an interfaith vocational training center where we brought Muslims and Christians together. For 2 years they learned carpentry and other technical skills. But the idea was to cement the relationship between these two groups. And they would return home as ambassadors of peace, instruments of peace, and so on. And that has helped to decrease the tension, because after 2 years of studying together, doing things together, even taking lessons in Islamic religious knowledge and Christian religious knowledge, it helps to bring down tension. And they go back to their villages as people who have something to offer. And I want to also commend the positive part played by some Muslims, sometimes Christians, towards Muslims or towards Christians. Like you mentioned about somebody, a Muslim arguing that a cross could be planted, and arguing from the Islamic point of view that it was possible. And so that is very, very positive. Back home, I remember when the herdsmen were attacking people and killing people, villagers were running helter-skelter, but they ran to the mosque. And this mosque was able to welcome many Christians, more Christians than Muslims. They all ran to the imam, and he welcomed them and embraced them, and then came out to apprehend the attackers and said, look, you kill me first before you can touch these people. Meanwhile, these Christians and Muslims were safely locked up in the mosque. And when they considered his position in the society, and the influence he wields, these attackers retreated. And that was how the Muslims and Christians in the mosque were saved. So such positive actions, I think, should be reported, and we should see more of them, and people should be encouraged to act based on our common humanity, not just about our personal religious views or idiosyncrasies.
Although I still see 4 requests for the floor, this is unfortunately all the time we have for questions today. So I would like to say a word of thanks to our extraordinary panel, Ambassador Sam Brownback, Archbishop Ignatius Kaigama, Dr. Heinar Kajuhas, and Dr. Thomas Farr. I thank once again the NGO Committee on Freedom of Religion and Belief for co-sponsoring today's event and for all it does to keep the focus on Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights here at the United Nations and beyond. Finally, I thank each of you for coming. Have a good afternoon.